When is the right time for you to install EV charging? Welcome back to another episode of the EV Charging Minute. I'm Tony Booth, your host of the show here. Longtime EV kind of uh, enthusiast, more so of a thought person, right? I've been thinking about EVs for a long time. So, anyway, also the founder of Stay in Charge, as you know, the host and kind of promoter of this podcast for everybody. But today, because I got questions after, last week we talked a little bit about kind of, the right time, easing into it. Uh, and I had people reach out after that, really with, asking about the starter kit kind of stuff we do and things like that. But, then still had people asking, how do we know the right time? Because even though that, we developed that nice little kit, which makes it relatively inexpensive to get involved with EV charging, it's still a capital expense. And I don't, I've been a businessman my entire life, and the last thing I want to do is have people wasting money. So, so it comes down to what is the right timing to do all this stuff. So what I always try to tell everybody, if you're a commercial real estate property, the bulk of them, like not everything's not going to necessarily fall into this case. Had a great conversation with somebody the other day that was talking about a municipal golf course, right? They have local people that come in and play golf there. Like, do they really need a charger? It's cool if you have people that drive a distance, but unless they had some reason for people to be at the range, things like that. But anyway, I get questioned all the time. When is the right time? Like, is it the right time to do this? And what I tell everybody, and this thing we tell everybody, it's not a matter of if you need EV charging. It's a matter of when will you need EV charging, right? So if you think back and look back at Wi-Fi at hotels, years ago, it wasn't a big deal. You didn't have Wi-Fi. Nobody really cared, right? Like, so what? But then there came a period of time that was like the number one sought after amenity, and people were filtering, planning a trip, you filtered for Wi-Fi because you wanted to be able to connect, and, nobody wanted to lug their Cat 5 cables around and all those kind of things, right? So if you look at that, it kind of went through a progression, and even in the Wi-Fi state of things, you didn't expect Wi-Fi everywhere in the beginning, but pretty much nowadays you do, right? Like, I can't think of a hotel that I would stay at or a place I would visit that I wouldn't expect there to be Wi-Fi, right? Now, when I look at commercial real estate, that obviously is more than just hotels, but I couldn't imagine going to an apartment complex these days that says, oh, sorry, we don't have any way for you to have cable or Wi-Fi or anything like that, right? Like, it's got to be there. Same way with most of your cafes. What coffee shop are you going to go to today that doesn't have Wi-Fi for you to sit there and hook up? And in fact, most restaurants have it. A lot of stores have it. So it's the same thing. Years ago on the Wi-Fi side, if you didn't have it, it didn't like mess you up too bad, right? You didn't lose that much. But today, if you don't have it, you're probably going to be losing out. So the $100 question is, in EV charging, is when is the right time? And we'll get through today. What I really want to do is just touch on some key factors to look at. Talk a little bit about, how to do some feasibility thoughts on it, and some other kind of things to look at. So to frame it first, and a lot of the different stuff we've talked about, I bring this up quite a bit. It comes down to really defining your goals, right? As a commercial establishment, you need to understand, why do you want to put in EV charging? And that's going to vary. Every single person out there has a different reason why they may want to or need to put in EV charging. If you have a convenience store or a gas station off a major highway on an exit, you probably need to be looking at putting in EV charging, because you need to be ready to replace the traffic that's going to go away as more people transition to EVs, they have no reason to stop at your convenience store unless you have an EV charger. So in that case, you need to look at it and realize that, you know, you're definitely needing one eventually if you're going to remain in the same type of business. And so you got to kind of figure out why. Now, if you're having an apartment complex and you're in a very rural area and maybe it's a small complex and, you know, you're kind of on the mid-level scale, then you need to understand, like, is an EV charger really even impacting me right now, right? Is putting that thing in going to get me a different tenant, another tenant? Is it going to make my bookings go faster, right? Because in some areas, it doesn't make sense yet. You're going to just go spend $5,000-$6,000 to put something in that nobody uses. And the problem is not just that you invested the money, is when the things aren't being used, they're not being looked after, they're not being taken care of, and they just, then they're not working when somebody needs them. This is the case that happened with all the chargers that get into these municipal things. You know, 10 years ago, people were throwing these things, you know, in these parking lots. Nobody uses them. And it's like, they're just, they're broken now. So like I always say, I talk about the goals, you know, making your goals, setting your goals for what you want to do, and what is the reason you're putting it in. And here's, when we work with everybody, we have, you know, kind of three things that we key into that we feel that we want it to be, timing wise, to be ideal. So the first one we want that we try to, you know, help everybody do it is be the leader in your area. Because that's what you want to do, is be one of the first in your area for your niche, right? Like, not, you don't have to be the first EV, you know, the first location with EV charging, because if your customer base is not that right customer yet, then you don't need to be competing with somebody else. But in your niche, let's say you're a select service hotel, you have a certain traveler group that comes to your hotel, and there's probably 4 or 5 other select service hotels in your little, you know, exit area or your little market. Well, you want to be the first of that little niche. If you're, you know, multi-story condo complexes, apartment buildings, and, you know, you're in that luxury area of the high-end apartments, things like that. Well, you want to be the first one in your area that puts EV chargers in, because we want to take the lead, because what that helps us do is attract some new customers, steal some customers from other people, because we're the ones that put in the EV charging to attract them. The second thing we want to do is make sure we get them in time before we start losing customers, right? So you see how number 1 and number 2 kind of go hand in hand. If I wait too long to install my chargers, somebody else is going to beat me to it. They're going to be getting my customers. My customers that switch to EVs are now going to become their customers. So we want to do that. That's the second thing we look at. The third thing that we look at, that we feel is ultimately becomes one of the most important, is, can they pay for themselves in a 12 to 18 month time period? Now, that's a broad thing to define, is how they pay for themselves. Because if you're putting a charger in because you want to sell more goods out of your convenience store, or you want to have somebody come in and maybe buy a second cup of coffee at the cafe, or book a, you know, they're going to choose you over another hotel, that's got to be calculated into that payback period a little bit, right? You've got to give some value to that, or else you'll never fit into the right categories. So those are kind of the top 3 things. We want to make sure, obviously, if we can get them paid back in 12 to 18 months, we know they're being used, right? So everybody, you know, a lot of people always talk about right timing is, will they be used and all that. Well, we try to roll that into the payback period. If you look at everything from a payback period, then it makes sense, because even people that I've worked with in the same area, one person might see a payback in 6 or 8 months, where the other person might be 18 to 24 months, and they're in the same market, right? So they have the same EV penetration, the same traffic. So it's because of how they can generate revenue from it and other things. If I can book an extra room night because I have a charger, that's more value. A room night is more value than I can sell an extra set, an extra Twinkie and a fountain drink, right? So it varies on that. So we try to just stick with that 12 to 18 month payback period. That allows us to really dive in. So that's where you want to start, is set those goals. What do you want? What are your goals with this? Okay. So then once you've kind of figured that out, now we can look at the key factors to determining, are we going to reach those payback periods, right? So what we look at, number one, is the property location and the corresponding EV penetration. Location matters for a couple reasons. Location is going to matter, number one, on a broad level. If you are in a region or a state that has a high penetration of EVs, then obviously there's more EVs for you. There's more available customers, right? If you're out in California where the penetration is really high, you have a much larger customer base to pull from. If you're in the middle of Wyoming, you don't have a very big customer base to pull from. So that's one thing we have to pay attention to, is the location and the EV penetration in that market. Then along with location, we look at traffic counts, because based on your location, we want to see roughly in the area what kind of traffic's going by. If I have a convenience store that's located on I-40 and I'm right off an exit, perfect location, then I got a pretty good traffic count going by every day, and I can break that down to find out how many EVs pass by every day. So that can give me a good indication. Obviously, if I'm on a rural back road running through the mountains, there's not that much traffic every day. So I don't have the big client base. Okay. It's no different than citing a franchise or citing a gas station or a hotel, right? We're all commercial real estate professionals. So you kind of know how to find the right places for what you're doing. It's just taking that same approach and using it for your EV, and like, what is the market availability, right? Who can I get? Okay. So that's the number one thing we look at factor wise. Second thing you want to look at is, who are your current people, your current clients, your current residents, your current employees. If you're, looking at it from an employee standpoint, what is that group? And are any of them expecting EV charging or wanting EV charging, or will they be soon? Because the factor there that we want to be careful of, again, is losing those current clients, right? We don't want to lose their current clients. So that's where we got to really look into the customer demographic that you have. Like, what is the demographic of people that are coming to your establishment, or that you want to attract to your establishment? And on a side note here, if you want to move that, if you want to change your demographic a little bit, EV charging is a good way to take a look at that and see if that's a market you can move into. So that's another big factor is what are your current clients, residents, and your customer demographic, and how do those fit into the demographics of EV drivers? The main thing that we try to, that's obvious to everybody when it comes to EV drivers today is that group is typically going to be a little bit more affluent, right? They're going to have a little bit higher paying jobs. They're going to have a little bit more disposable income, obviously, because they spend extra money to buy the car, right? Like to buy that car or truck. The EVs are not inexpensive. They're not costly yet. So the people that are buying them are early adopters with a little bit extra spending money. So if that's your demographic, or it's getting into your demographic, okay, that's where we pay attention. Because in anything, when it's early adopters and it starts moving into mass adoption, it always starts in the, the kind of the upper the higher, the higher, the higher free, free money available, right? Like the disposable income is where a lot of that stuff starts. And then as the price of the cars go down and the used car market starts to build, then that moves further down the list, because even your people in a lower income bracket eventually want to have an EV because they're going to save money on gas and things like that. So that's the other thing you want to watch. And again, this is why we say it's a matter of when, not if, because eventually all demographics fit EV drivers, so they all end up being a real estate customer. So that's where you pay attention to that customer demographic to make sure where you're at on that scale so that you can fit in. And those are really, when we look at everything, those are the two key factors. The third thing we will take a look at, because this is really just as important, is cost. Because we got to get some estimate of the cost, because I might look at a property that says, wow, that everything's an A+ when it comes to traffic. It's an A+ when it comes to the EV market, and it's the ideal demographic because these are the people that come here anyway. And then when we find out that it's going to require an extra $10,000 or $15,000 in investment, it might not be time for there yet, right? Like we want to hold off a little bit because we don't want to jump in, because that added cost may extend that 12 to 18 month payback period. So those are the key factors to look at. You'll want to pay attention to those. What we recommend to everybody is to do somewhat of a feasibility study. And I say somewhat only in the means that if you're a level 2 type deployment, like if you're an apartment complex or a hotel or maybe a retail center, things like that, where you're going to deploy the more cost effective, the cheaper level 2 deployments, then you don't have to get as in depth. Like if you called one of our team members up, we're going to pull your stuff up on a map. We're going to know some demographics in the area. We're going to know some penetration, and really in a matter of 10 to 15 minutes, we can tell you what we think in relatively good predictability of what's going to happen, in your area. So I kind of call that like a napkin feasibility study, and we'll talk a little bit more about that in a second. Versus the other side, when you're going into the DC fast chargers. You're talking now about investing a couple $100,000 possibly. So in that scenario, we want to be way more confident in that return and in the traffic that it's going to generate, the revenue that it's going to generate. So we want to be way more detailed on that feasibility study. That I recommend you hire someone or really at least talk with some people, really figure it out. You've done feasibility studies, I'm sure, yourself. Make sure you do your due diligence when it comes to those, just because it is a costly thing. So that one, I really don't want to get in and, kind of do the DIY on a DC fast charging feasibility study, but I will give you a couple tips on a kind of a napkin feasibility study that we recommend to people on the L2 side. So couple things that we recommend to everybody is get a notebook, put it somewhere for the people that answer your phones and things like that, and just tell them to start making a note when somebody calls and asks for an EV charger. Make a note for somebody once a week or once every now and then to walk around the parking lot and just see how many EVs are out in your parking lot. It's a very good way to tell. Me, because I'm keen to it, when I go into a hotel nowadays, I always circle the parking lot. I always look and see how many EVs are out in that parking lot. Just that's a good little feasibility study, right? Like if you had your somebody at your property walk out there every so often and see how many EVs are in the parking lot and what that are not charging, you're giving up the opportunity of making a couple bucks that hour, and we know every little bit helps. So that's a little easy way to do a kind of an L2 back of the napkin feasibility. So that's the kind of the thing that I would say. If you're not sure, get to do some feasibility looks at this, do some studies, reach out to us. We're glad to help out. We do detailed feasibility studies for our DC fast chargers. We've got a couple companies that we work with too as well that will jump into an engineered kind of a full study on all that stuff. So that's a big thing, a big step in determining when. And then the last thing I want to mention here, only because I try to mention this as much as possible. The other thing that could change the timing is the availability of incentives. Okay. If there's good incentives in your area, you might want to jump in ahead of time. I had, and I feel bad, I had a bunch of North Carolina folks a couple years ago. We had met at an event and we were telling everybody about these incentives. And so everybody got pretty excited that we talked to, and we were working through trying to get everybody, get an application in for them. And people just didn't realize the deadline. And we had about a half a dozen people miss out on submitting their applications for these rebates. And those rebates would have covered like 85% of the cost of EV charging. And the bad thing is they closed off. And once they closed that round off, they announced they were not going to do any more incentives for EV charging. So that group of people lost completely everything, no chance to go back and get any more. So it was a shame, felt bad for that. So you want to make sure you're paying attention to incentives that are out there. Like, for instance, here in the state of Georgia, with one of the power companies, if you have a property, depending on, your layout, what we can do, what that infrastructure cost is. But we just finished up putting together a deal for a property. They're going to put in 6 chargers. I'm sorry. The program requires they install 6. We were able to get them in and approved, covered for about 4 years of software, the chargers, the make ready, everything. And it's a little over $1,900 for them with all the rebates and incentives that they're getting. So when you look at all that stuff, that's a good reason to jump out ahead and take care of those incentives. And one other little side note I'll mention, and don't tell everybody I told you this, you might want to beat the brands. Okay. If you are especially on the hotel side, right? If you're a hotel brand, we all know that sooner or later, they're going to be telling you to put these chargers in, right? It's coming down the pike. And what they tell you to put in may be way more than you need today, right? So I mean, and this I know firsthand. I have customers that we've had to put in chargers that they have chargers in their parking lot that are, that they're not being used to any relatively good level whatsoever because they were in a market that they needed 2 chargers and had to put in 6. So that's another reason to kind of get out ahead of this. If you can beat some requirement that's coming down the pike, pay attention to your local municipalities too, because some of them are going to start enforcing this stuff and telling you that, oh, you're doing a renovation. We're sorry, you need to have X number of chargers installed in your parking lot. So if we can get out ahead of some of that too, might save you a couple dollars there as well. So that's it for today. I actually thought this one was going to be quick, but kind of went a little bit long on us. But anyway, again, it's not a matter of if you need EV charging. It's a matter of when. And reach out to us. We're here to help you. Believe me, I want to sell you chargers for the next 25 years. So I'm not going to sell you too many today because then you will not be very happy with me. So reach out to anybody on my team. We all have been, that's been trained into our staff. We all know we don't oversell. We give you what you need to make you have a good experience with EV charging. So that's all, folks. I hope you learned a little bit today, and we'll see you on the next episode of EV Charging Minute.